Hello and welcome to the Home Assistant Podcast. My name's Phil. Joining me as usual, we've got Rohan. Hello, Rohan.
Hey, how's it going?
And today we are joined by Rian. How's it going?
Hey guys, how are you?
As usual, this episode of the Home Assistant Podcast is sponsored by Home Assistant Cloud by Nabricasa. Easily access your local Home Assistant instance remotely for a small monthly fee that supports the Home Assistant and the ESP Home projects. Configuration is done via the user interface, so no fiddling with the router settings, SSL certificates, or any YAML. All right. Rian, where are we joining us from today?
I'm in Ireland, just outside Dublin.
Nice.
I think this might be the first person we've had from Ireland.
I think it is.
Yeah, I haven't seen. Yeah. I'll go through those. I'm pretty sure you might be the first one from Ireland. So anyway, welcome to the podcast.
Cheers. Hope it doesn't disappoint.
Yeah.
That's it. So
Setting
I
up
guess
the entire country for success or failure here.
Exactly.
That's it. Will we get another Irish person on the podcast? This is the one will dictate that. Why don't you give us a bit of a background on your experience with home automation and what's led you here today?
Sure, yeah. So I suppose it originally, my Home Assistant first came on my radar kind of the beginning of 2020. Someone in work mentioned that he was using it to Frankenstein his home heating.
Mm-hmm.
So, and then I had two Philips Hue lights that I'd attempted previously to use. I used one to wake me up in the morning. Basically, I had the sunrise effect, but that didn't last, so it was kind of sitting there unused. So then I got Home Assistant, and I originally stuck it. It was on a VM on my laptop, which was obviously terrible because when I closed my laptop, it closed with it.
Yeah.
But then I bought a little Chrome box at the time, and actually they've gone up since. But back then it was even cheaper than the Raspberry Pi, so it was great. So then I was able to have Home Assistant running full time, and I just started with little things. I was in an apartment in London at the time, so the first one was simply those bulbs to make them more usable, and I got the little son-off buttons, so I was able to control them from a different area in the apartment. And yeah, you just kind of build up from there. Like I had a weird issue where my Google Assistant would refuse to stream an Irish radio station. TuneIn would say it couldn't, but which made no sense because you'd open up the app and it would work straight away. So I had a button then where I could just press that and it would trigger the casting of the streaming of the radio station I use the most through Home Assistant onto the speaker. So it kind of those are the kind of two initial actually kind of useful things. And then of course I started a little bit into slightly more unnecessary things because I was home a lot and had a lot more time on our hands, obviously, at the beginning of into 2020. So one was I actually lived right beside a kind of a tidal lock off the Thames in London. And the tide, I was kind of used to love going out when the tide was really high because it would be just kind of surging in. So I found this website which had tides on it, and I was kind of, obviously I'm a software programmer as well, so Home Assistant, I'm always fighting this little battle of wanting it to be an appliance, but also kind of wanting to know how it works in the background.
100%. Yeah.
So I set up, and there was no good tides integration that I could find at the time for high tides and low tides. So I found this website that, and originally I did build it admittedly using web scraping, which I know is kind of frowned upon, but I did find then that they actually have an RSS feed for each location. So that's kind of fair game then, right? It's designed to pull. So I have that code somewhere up on GitHub. And it's not like it's not a full clean integration, but it's almost there, where you get your tides for the day into Home Assistant basically. So that was kind of first fun thing I started doing. Then after that, I had some, we're talking ancient Arduinos with temperature sensors that I had made, I would say 15 years ago.
Wow.
And
Yeah.
At the time with work as well, I was doing some projects with MQTT for the first time.
Mhm.
So and then to kind of understand Home Assistant MQTT, I actually wrote a script that would take the sensor data off the Arduinos and then register themselves as sensors with Home Assistant. And then you've got your temperature and humidity. And I was amazed by just how easy it was. It's crazy. The MQTT, what a sensor is just so simple.
Yes.
And Home Assistant took care of the rest of and obviously Home Assistant's got so much more feature rich since then. So things like history and all of that has kind of really fleshed out a huge amount since then, basically. So that was kind of 2020. I didn't do much in 2021. I moved back to Ireland. We were living in a different apartment. I had the kind of same stuff about the lights. Obviously, no need for the tides anymore. No need for the radio thing anymore. So then the big change where I started doing a lot more again was at the beginning of 2022 when we moved into a house.
Mm-hmm.
So it was our own house, so we could actually do things to it. And it had a lot more problems as well, just the size of the house and the complexity of it, I suppose.
And the costs.
Of
automating that too.
For sure, yeah. So I've always been conscious. I've never wanted to go like overboard, and I always want to get I want to be as efficient as possible with what I make smart in the house. It is a slow creep, you find though as well. You
always
almost once a month you'll get something small, but I suppose like some of the ones where I was trying to make the best use, and these are the ones I really enjoy Home Assistant for, was like simple stuff like when I moved in, I had a washing machine which was unusually left behind from the previous people, and I think it's 18 years old or something like that. It's an old washing machine.
So pretty much before Wi-Fi was a thing, you've got to
pretty much, and before a delay feature was a thing, right? Which is a big thing for me. So at the minute I'm on an electricity tariff where my electricity between 2 a.m. and 4 a.m. is about a quarter of the price during the day.
Yeah.
So sense. I was like, okay, is there any way I can do this without, buying a whole new washing machine just for that one little feature, right? So for that, I initially had a SwitchBot, which is the little Bluetooth guy that kind of actually physically presses the start button. And I also then, kind of out of curiosity, I did have a smart plug on it with power monitoring at the back.
Nice.
But what I actually eventually figured out, and I've done this with my dishwasher as well, is that washing machines and dishwashers, if the power gets cut to them when they're in a wash, when the power comes back on, they will have stored the cycle where they were, and they just continue. They take off where they left off. So what I have beside my washing machine and dishwasher is an NFC tag. So basically, I load up the machine, I press the start button, and I just swipe my phone, and Home Assistant then kills the power, and at 2 a.m. turns the power back on, and they just continue where they left off. So really, really like that, because there's no need to buy a whole new washing machine, dishwasher, but yet I'm still able to get my scheduling in.
Yeah. So you basically built your own delay with an NFC tag and
and the smart plug, right? And I was even happy with that, because that meant I was able to take the SwitchBot away. And originally I hadn't it in Home Assistant, but Bluetooth and Home Assistant's got so easy now that I do have it. And I actually have the SwitchBot double-side taped to a dehumidifier.
Okay.
So similarly enough, it kind of changes. So in the summer, I generally do the washing at night, and then during the day, there's the sun to dry the clothes. You can dry them outside.
Yeah.
But then in winter, it's actually the drying is the thing that uses them more electricity. So I have and in Home Assistant, it's one of my favorite features. Whoever wrote it, thanks. Is the scheduler and scheduler card. Because it's just so easy to set them, turn them on or off. So for those instances, actually, it's the dehumidifier that's scheduled. The washing machine can be run during the day, and then the dehumidifier comes on overnight and uses the cheap electricity, basically. So those are just super, super useful kind of things. And I didn't have to buy, again, another smart anything. I just was able to add the smarts quite easily to the existing things. And even on the washing machine, actually, we had a problem where I was finding that it wasn't completing cycles if there wasn't hot water in the cylinder, which was confusing because washing machines for a long time now shouldn't be using the hot water. They should use the cold water only.
Exactly, yeah.
I have the smart thing Zigbee plugs, then they do power monitoring as well. So I was actually able to see that the washing machine never used more than like 300 watts, which if a washing machine is heating water, it should be using, 2 kilowatts or something. So that actually was my clue to think, is there something wrong with the element? So actually I opened up the washing machine. Again, it's old. I don't really, if I break it, it's no problem. Break it further, I should say. I was able to go in, and sure enough, the element had broken, basically. So I was able to swap that out. So again, thanks to having the data from Home Assistant, I was able to diagnose that problem so much sooner.
Nice.
And able to fix it very, very easily, really, in the end.
And also, considering you had an old enough washing machine that you could probably repair it, as like, I think if a newer one broke, it would be like, oh, it's made from cheap parts anyway, mate. It's cheaper to go out and buy a new washing machine now than.
Sure, yeah. So I must say, like, I'll plug Bosch on that front. That even for ancient parts, their website was super easy to find exactly the parts you needed, and
very nice,
cheap and easy. Just where to start. Yeah, I've heard our stories of more modern brands where it's kind of like, oh well, we made that 2 years ago. That's
sorry, too bad buying your washing machine. Yeah.
So yeah, very, very happy with that. I suppose on the whole, these things get a bit tangled with these different systems. Another thing that when we came into the house was the alarm. So it had an old style alarm with just kind of contact switches on doors and windows.
Yeah.
And one thing I kind of hate more than anything, and I didn't want to be the person to do, was I just didn't trust this alarm, and I kind of didn't want to start using it, and then it going off when I'm not there, and the neighbors hating this new guy who has this alarm
totally
going off the whole time, right?
Same thing.
Yeah.
So what I ended up doing, and I suppose I kind of didn't trust myself to fully use Home Assistant as my alarm, because things like the one I ended up getting is a Yale Smart Sync, I think it's called. It has things like a battery backup, for instance, right? So little bits like that. You could figure out a way to have a full Home Assistant system and battery backup and things, but at the time in particular, I just said, look, let's get an independent thing to start off with. So I set that up, and that's all wireless sensors, and there is an integration for that. So then I was able to know the state of the alarm in Home Assistant and turn it on or off. And also, importantly, it exposes there's a panic button, and that's also exposed in Home Assistant. And the way I was able to use that then was I have these other sensors from the old alarm, and I said, okay, is there any way I can make any use of them? So I think a few people have mentioned it before. There's the Konnected project with a K.
Yes, that's what I was going to say. Did you go down that road?
So I got one of those, and super actually easy to after labeling wires. All right, took a little bit of effort, but got that in, and then you can use Alarmo in Home Assistant, obviously, to configure and control that. But because I had the Yale one integrated as well, I actually have automations then, so that when I trigger the Yale alarm, it automatically triggers Alarmo. They synchronize each other, basically. So if I turn one on, it turns the other one on,
right,
and vice versa. And then if a Alarmo sensor on the old alarm gets triggered, it presses the panic button on the Yale alarm, right? So then I've got my way back into the fairly closed ecosystem.
Yeah.
And then I get alerts, and that sends off the siren, and I'll have 2 sirens now, so it gets very, very, very noisy.
Yeah.
And I was vindicated in once I had connected and I had that data as well, I could see that the front door sensor at the time was not reliable, and one of the window circuits as well, if it gets windy, would also pop on and off. So I had to,
because it would like flex the door or flex the window or something like that, and
exactly. So if I'd actually started using that old alarm, I would have really been annoying. I would have been confused why it wouldn't come on, because sometimes it would refuse to set when things are open, and then you wouldn't know what. And then also when the wind would come up and I'd be away. So I was able to fix those things, and actually I actually know what the alarm is doing now, right?
Yeah.
Which was very important. And another kind of side thing on the connected board is, and it's actually on their website, they only label it that you need to buy the add-on board to get this, but you can actually plug in sensors into that board as well. But I was able to do it on the out of the box board, I suppose, the basic board. I just needed to add a little adapter to it to get 5 volts is the only reason why normally you need the add-on board to expose that 5 volts for the sensors. And just as it happens, where the connected alarm terminates is right beside the hot water cylinder in the house. So, and it's a really small cylinder, so it's really annoying, basically, knowing how much hot water there is and will it run out, and just in an instant. And there is a semi-smart heating system connected up to that, but it only obviously has a temperature sensor at one location on the tank.
Right.
So now with the connected board, I was actually able to add 3 more sensors. So now I know the water temperature at the top, the middle, and the bottom of the water tank. So if I just want a quick shower, I can tell. I have it like at the height kind of on the tank, where basically you just have a quick shower. You don't need to worry about turning on any heating. So you know that for a fact.
Yeah.
And then with the deeper ones down, you have a better indication of actually how full it is if someone wants to have a bath or something.
Right.
And a slight extension, I suppose, onto that was I've also replaced the immersion timer. So the electric, it's mostly gas that heats the water, but then sometimes it can be useful. And with that cheap 2 a.m. to 4 a.m. period that I mentioned before, you can actually, the electricity is actually cheaper than gas, which is pretty weird, at least here.
Okay.
So for that, I got one of the Sonoff POW Elite, I think it is, which is just a higher amperage smart switch kind of inline one. And ideally, I would have liked Zigbee to keep as many things Zigbee as possible. But in that case, I wanted a physical button so that my wife, or even I've used it myself, if I just don't want to pull out my phone or something, and if Home Assistant is on fire, I do want to be able to still operate it. So I'm not sure why a lot of them, I suppose it's kind of the form factor, right? These aren't ones that plugs go into. But I still think that they should always have a physical button. So that one's there. And that means, again, with the scheduler, I can, or if I want a lot of hot water really quickly, I can just pull out my phone and turn on the gas and the electricity from Home Assistant, which is super useful. I haven't converted the Sonoff to Tasmota yet. I do want to, because the way that it reports currently, obviously there is the Sonoff LAN. Is it local, not local? I don't know, but it doesn't really report its power information very regularly.
Yeah.
Which is something I kind of do, because I have, so all the plugs I have with the power monitoring, I have those obviously in the energy dashboard, which is really good. And I also have a whole home energy monitor. I didn't get any of the ones that kind of go into the fuse board and clamps, CT clamps and all that. I got one, it's a Brent, I think is the name of it. Our Devel code. It seems to be sold under. And what it actually does is, and I think Home Assistant last year showed off a way to kind of DIY this. It sticks onto your meter outside, and it's a smart meter which flashes basically at a known rate. And I suppose one of the issues I had with the ESP versions for me is my meter's on the side of the house, right? To get power out there and then to kind of DIY a power pack thing, so this was great. So it just takes a few normal batteries and stuck it on. So now I have the whole house's power, and then I have the power of individual devices. So I do have, I suppose, sometimes my terminology on Home Assistant goes a bit awry. Is it a script at this stage, which it's in my configuration YAML. It's where I take away the power usage of all the other devices from the whole house's energy usage.
Right.
So I can kind of at a glance see if I take away those big consumer items, what's left.
So
that can be really useful the odd time then to figure out kind of what's going on, or just at a glance, then I have my graph and it actually makes sense to what everything adds up to basically.
Right. Okay.
So I'm guessing you could do things like, all right, my baseline is, I've got the fridge always running. So how much is my fridge consuming? How much is the TV on standby consuming? And you can take those away and go, all right, well, this is what's actually consuming my house right now. What's different, sort of thing.
Yeah, and one thing I actually installed today was we got electricity put out to a garden shed, and we got a freezer put out there.
Yep. Okay.
So the freezer is one I will want to do, because if anything happens to the you've got a huge freezer full of food, you don't want to leave without, leaving the door open or for it to break or get turned off accidentally. So I will be adding some automations on that, and I'd be interested to know, does anyone, I suppose you're getting into kind of like, is machine learning at a certain point to kind of notice, for something to learn what's the normal freezer patterns and But I'm sure
it might be as easy as something like getting a temperature probe that's enclosed in like glycol or something, right? So, because what that does is it basically acts as a temperature barrier or a thermal barrier to say, like, so because a lot of times when you open a freezer, for example, you get a rush of warm air that goes into the freezer and cold air coming out, right? But that glycol, so if you have a normal temperature, whatever, whether it's a standard probe or whatever it is, what ends up happening is that ends up being, you'll get that spike and then back and spike and then back. Whereas with the glycol barrier, what'll happen is it'll take longer. So that spike won't be a spike. It'll be, if it even notices, it'll be a bump. So then that way it's more consistent, right? So then you just look for anomalies in your, any of those pieces.
I think I might even be able to do it as simple as like, because a freezer, I think they have a rating, right, for a certain number of hours that it's okay for them not to have electricity. So I could even do in the last 8 hour period or the last day, is it way off in either up or down? And that should give me a good indication of if something really bad happened.
What you could do, I'm wondering if you could just create something that, obviously if you know what the current output of the freezer is, right, and then every 5 minutes or something, you just add that to a number helper in Home Assistant and just like keep summing that number. And then at midnight, reset it back to 0. And then you get like a daily, how much does the freezer consume?
Yeah, we don't even need to do that. Home Assistant does all that for us because the plug exposes the energy. So I have that in the statistics. That's all there in the database, So we'll see. Obviously, with a 3-month-old baby, time for automations can be curtailed, shall we say?
Yes.
So I suppose the other biggest kind of project, and this would be the one that I've spent the most time on by far, is the heating. And I actually noticed like my usage of Home Assistant in the winter, it's dark and it's cold. I use it so much more. In the summers, you don't need your heating and you don't need the bulbs until basically you're asleep. But so what we had was pretty normal kind of 2 story house here, but the previous people had built an extension to the kitchen at the back, so a single story extension.
Mm-hmm.
But they didn't. Maybe there's a reason they didn't zone the heating while they were doing that. So you've now kind of got the whole house on one heating zone, but different areas of the house heat up at very different speeds.
Mhm.
So when we first moved in, we would be cold in the kitchen, but absolutely roasting upstairs in the bedrooms. So it just really was very uncomfortable. And then, so the radiators all have the TRV, the thermostatic radiator valves on them. But I found that they're kind of in this middle zone of, in theory, they should regulate the heat of the radiators and allow you to have per room control per your house, and make things ease up. But they basically have a fundamental flaw that they sense the temperature in the worst possible place in the room to sense the temperature, which is right beside the radiator, right?
Yeah.
So
Nice.
as soon as the radiator comes on, depending on the room or depending on where that valve is in the room, and we have
Cuts
this in
off.
particular in one of our rooms, there's kind of the window is a bit of a bay window, and it creates this kind of hot pocket where that radiator would think the room is roasting, but it's not. It's just that little local area is roasting.
Yeah.
So to try and get around this, I got they're the Mo's TRVs, so they're Zigbee. They just take two
Mhm.
AA batteries.
Okay.
And I've slowly added them to everywhere in the house. And strangely, again, there was one bedroom hadn't a valve, so I did have to get a plumber in to get that added. So I added them, and they helped a lot. But I could see in the data, they still had the same issue with the temperature, the local temperature hotspotting. But what I've been able to do to counteract that basically is, since I have the Zigbee temperature sensors, the little sonophones in every room,
Mm-hmm.
and I've chosen good locations away from the sun, away from the radiator, that actually give you an accurate measurement of the room. I was able to go into, and I didn't figure out a way to do this fully in the UI. It's probably a way I could do this. I tried a few blueprints. I couldn't find one that did exactly what I wanted, but it could be just someone pointing me in the right direction. But my solution anyway was that in my configuration YAML, I have a sensor in there, and I basically take the room temperature away from the temperature reported from the TRV, and that gives me my offset number. And then I have an automation basically, so that any time that offset changes, it updates the state of so there is an offset attribute for the TRV. So basically it updates that to say -3, right? So you think it's 25, but actually it's 22 degrees in the room or something like that.
Right.
So since I've done that, it's like been super reliable. It's very even across the house, and the rooms actually get to the temperatures they're supposed to. The little extension I haven't fully done off that, but I will a little more, is I have some buttons where which trigger an automation, which is like a downstairs only or an upstairs only or a kitchen only, which actually for an hour will drop the target temperature in those locations, in all locations but the one you want to actually heat. So I'm trying to give myself a lot more zoned approach without actually ripping up all the floorboards and getting it properly done. So, but I've actually found that since I have the offset and the TRV set up, I don't really need to interact with the heating as much, which is always the goal you want. You want to just set and forget and actually be comfortable. So
let
Mhm.
the house do its own thing, right? Like let Home Assistant manage it for you.
exactly, like it works. Yeah, it's been so good this winter in comparison.
So,
Whereas in the past,
question for you then:
it was all over the
How are
place.
you managing the statistics? So obviously, Home Assistant is getting all this data in. Are you then using Home Assistant, the database that Home Assistant has, to then what's the random temperature of this room over time? What's the average and all that? Or are you then exporting all that data from Home Assistant into something like a Grafana database or Influx somewhere else?
No, I've never exported, and I've never had the need or really the want, once I got
Yep.
this real-time setup, I never actually need to programmatically
Okay.
go back into the history. If everything is working in real time as it is now, and the offset, the automation and the sensor and the configuration YAML update themselves in real time, they keep themselves perfectly up to date. I know theoretically you could get into, is it going to be sunny outside today, and therefore don't turn the heating on as much. Little things like that in the morning. Unfortunately, my heating, while it does have a remote access, it's EPH. It's a smallish company, so they don't have an official anything actually for my one apart from their own app. There was a Home Assistant integration, but it broke. There is some pull requests. Some people are trying to get it to be fixed, and it would be nice, obviously, to be able to do that, because again, I could then from Home Assistant, the really interesting thing for me for that would be to see actually, it actually shows you when the heating is firing, when it's actually on and in use, which would be just very interesting to see what the pattern is there, like what when are you having it on too much, when are you just being kind of inefficient in some way. But we'll see.
How can you optimize, basically?
Yeah, just for comfort, and I suppose trying to, because it is gas, trying to use as little as possible.
Sure.
Ideally, I'd like solar and heat pumps and all those things, but our roof is a bit higgledy-piggledy, so I don't think we'll ever, unfortunately, really be able to actually do that. You have to have the right orientation and the size of your roof, and a big checkbook initially as well. So I'm trying to think. I've covered a lot of kind of the main items that I have. Like I've other things. I had even computers turning on or off in office hours. Basically, the computer would just turn itself off after a certain period, so it's not left on overnight. Little things like that.
Yeah. So I guess then they sort of get into the fun stuff. So what would be one of your favorite automations that you maybe it's not functional, it's just something that you're really proud of that you've got set up?
I think that the washing machine dishwasher thing, because of the limited amount of reducing the amount of hardware needed to actually do that, I think that's really nice, right? And that's kind of my favorite uses of Home Assistants, where you do something without having to actually have more stuff, right?
Yeah.
So kind of the NFC tags are great for that as well. I have them around a few places where, you could be tempted to buy another button or a Zigbee button, but like really you don't use that much, and your phone is with you most of the time. So just have an NFC tag do that, basically.
What else do you do with your NFC tags, just out of curiosity?
Not a huge amount, apart from just in a few places. I toggle at my desk here. I toggle a few the light in the room and things, because if I'm on a call and I'm stuck, I can't move. So you're
sure,
and you don't want to be your eyes. If you're on a Zoom call or whatever, you don't want it to be distracting you. So you just swipe your phone, right? And I have one at the for the alarm at the door. I find myself don't use that too much, but technically I can just swipe to turn on the alarm. I have a button there, so I'm sure as life changes, when you buy NFC tags, you get a bag of 50 usually. So I'm sure I'll end up with little further things on top of those.
Nice.
Suppose I'm trying to think of other things I haven't mentioned. I have some Wi-Fi USB switches. I don't know if you've ever seen those. So these I saw them. There's a guy on, he's funny, he's Andreas Spice. He's a Swiss guy, I think, on YouTube. So he showed flashing Tasmota onto them. There's Cine Link, AliExpress, random things.
Okay.
So I do have a few of those. I only have one in use currently, but that's for kind of just a low-level light. We've reused kind of effectively what are Christmas lights, cheap string of IKEA Christmas lights, and I had them on a mains power switch, but I can say to myself, plugs are a bit of a premium, but I had I have the smart clock, the Lenovo one beside my bed, which has USB plug on it, which is terrible for charging your phone because it's just way too slow. But now I've been able to plug that in there, so I can just shout at Google and whatever Home Assistant. I have a button as well, technically, to turn that on or off by the USB power, effectively. I'm sure I'll find other uses for that, but because I have two more of them. But some of the issues you find yourself is now at the minute that analog thing. To have full control, you actually have to search for the more analog thing, because once something is anyway digital, very few things when you power on, you'll have to press a button then to actually get them to do something.
Yeah.
I had the this same problem. I wanted some electric blankets on the bed, like to be able to control them through Home Assistant, make sure we don't leave them on, right? And I bought these electric blankets. They were cheap. I went, yep, that's fine. I'll click on a timer, but I'm not going to use that. I'm just going to turn them on. And sure enough, they're digital. And as soon as you power cycle them, the power comes back on, and they don't remember their state, so they just go off. So there's no way I can automate them in Home Assistant. So
yeah, it's frustrating.
It's frustrating, right?
So I suppose the other, and this will be another big, this will be the last big project that I've done, and which I will, and actually once we come into Home Assistant voice, I think is going to be great. So we had in that kitchen, which was kind of the cold extension, basically, there was a vent on the wall, which obviously is useful at certain times of year or when the humidity is high. But a lot of the time it was just there, and you could even see, I bought a thermal camera, you could just see how cold, it was like a waterfall of cold coming in through it. And technically it would seal, you could close over this little flimsy plastic thing, but like it did absolutely nothing. So then I found this, it's like a single room mechanical heat recovery. And effectively what it is it's just a slightly larger diameter pipe, which has kind of a ceramic core in it. And it has a fan, and the fan pulls air in for 70 seconds and then blows air out for 70 seconds. And the theory, at least, is that it recaptures, when it's drawing the air back in, some of the heat that you expelled will have gone into the ceramic, right? So you're not just wasting your heat. I don't know how actually effective that is, but to be honest, for me, the more important thing is that it actually has a servo, so it seals itself really well on the inside of the room when you don't want the vent in use. And when I bought it, I didn't pay too much attention. I saw it had Wi-Fi connectivity, but unfortunately, the Wi-Fi connectivity is actually only for it connecting up to more of them. If you had one in another room, you could have them that they would synchronize. So that one would be drawing in while the other one would be drawing out. So your house kind of wouldn't be to the pressure, right? They would actually help each other. So that was a bit unfortunate, but its main power management is an infrared remote. So what I got for that was on his website, that there's a lot of good reviews. Smart Home Scene, they get through a lot of stuff. Is a little Moe's, again, I think, IR blaster. So I've that set up, and actually I've been able to recreate with buttons in the Home Assistant UI and a dashboard, even with all the icons, being able to, it's like almost perfectly looks the same as the actual physical remote, down to the symbols on it. Right. For the night, it has a low power night mode, and that's a moon, and like the icon pack in Home Assistant has that. It almost has anything. That's been great, because it just means that when I do actually want to interface with that, I don't physically have to go and find the remote. I just pull out my phone and actually turn it on or off. Nice. One issue of it always, and there's no real good solution for this, is around, obviously, in anything in red or with the switch bot, you have the same problem. You don't really know its state, which is unfortunate, and that's not going to go away. But for all these things, and even for something basic like temperatures in rooms, so I have Google smart devices around the house, and when Home Assistant exposes all its entities into Google, it really shows up how limited the feature set of the Google Assistant is. So like, Home Assistant is forced to expose temperatures as thermostats. because Google just doesn't seem to have the concept of a temperature sensor on its own.
Yeah.
So that's okay. I could be wrong on all this, of course, but so that's where the Home Assistant voice stuff, I think, like, is just going to be so good in that. There's just basic things, and for a lot of people, what the real usefulness of a smart assistant or these voice things, it's probably like 3 or 4 key things that you want.
Yeah.
And Google, like, their objective is not really that to help you with that, right? They've kind of loftier goals, and they just don't want to give you that flexibility. So
Sure.
Same with Amazon too.
Yeah, no different.
Like, I've just noticed recently, like, I would tell the little lady, turn off the lights, and then I'll get an ad would pop up on my Echo Show saying, "Oh, you just said, turn off the lights. Are you interested in these smart bulbs?" I'm like, "Well,
Really?
no, I've clearly already got the smart bulbs."
I
Yeah,
haven't noticed that in mine, but that's interesting.
yeah,
yeah. Clearly, they've got to start paying for these smart speakers somehow, right?
yeah. And the Google, I feel like the Google one has actually regressed and got worse, and it has a thing it likes to do. It just mishears you, not even talking about lights actually, and it likes to often turn on all lights, which is really annoying. Particularly if there's like, mostly it's myself and my wife are in one room, so at least it's not too bad for us to correct it. I can just say turn them all off, right?
Yeah.
But as there's, if you have visitors or other people in the house, then you have to kind of go around and find out.
Yeah.
Just a mess. So I'm really looking forward to the Home Assistant voice things improving, and the pace already, like, it's amazing how they're able to get it out, and the fact then that's kind of more, it ties properly into Home Assistant. So little things I want to ask it what temperature a room is, basic stuff like that, or for my weird edge case of that fan, the heat exchanger in the kitchen, I want to be able to ask certain 3 or 4 things, turn it on or toggle it while I'm cooking. I kind of use it as a supplementary exhaust fan a bit as well. So little things like that. It's actually just going to be so much, like, the Google Assistant is not really, its smart home features are not, they're super basic, and I think Home Assistant is going to eclipse that, like, so quickly, basically.
Yeah, I would love, like, with voice, and again, this is a bit of a pipe dream just because it's not on the Home Assistant team for this, right? But I would love for the ability to proxy my voice commands from an Amazon Echo or Google Hub device, whatever it is, into the Home Assistant voice. And again, like I said, this isn't on the Home Assistant team, right? Because it's manufacturers that need to allow you to do that. But that would be, because, I mean, the devices are pretty good, right? I mean, my Echo behind me here is extremely good. I mean, it even picks up stuff when I'm not talking to it. So it's
is that a bugger feature?
Yeah, that's right. Well, it's funny. We'd be sitting in, like, the other side of the house, and I'd hear the one, and again, nobody here, right? Nobody outside, anything like that. So it's not even like somebody talking really loud and the voice coming in or anything like that. But it's just like, you just hear, like, the echo in my office here behind me going off and being like, "Sorry, I didn't hear that." And I was like, "That's because nobody said anything." Right? And it's like,
I do have a problem with the wrong one answering at the minute. And the second one that answers, actually, I ended up putting it behind my TV because it's one thing I failed with Home Assistant. I wanted to, so I got an Android TV with a microphone and Google Assistant built in.
Yeah.
But what I found was that, say you're watching a movie, oftentimes you have to put the movies, the sound mixing seems to be much lower than TV shows and things, so you'll often have to put the TV volume up to like 50. But then if you ask Google to do anything, she's absolutely, like, roaring the house down. So I'd attempted an automation to, when the TV kind of moved to a pause state, or if the TV stopped and effectively was not playing anything, it would try, and I wanted to reset the volume back to 10 or 8, I think was kind of comfortable for Home Assistant. Which unfortunately I failed in my first attempt, and then I did the lazy solution was I just turned off the microphone and put another Google Nest Home thingy in behind the TV instead. But I think in that case it's, and I've seen it since, and I know Home Assistant in the newest release, there was an Android remote improvement came out. I think that really was down to the fact that the TV, its responsiveness and its reporting back to Home Assistant was really not consistent at all. So there's kind of, it's frustrating when you have these cases where you think the all singing and dancing thing is actually good, but sometimes it's actually worse. I had the same thing with an extractor fan. I got one which had Bluetooth, and officially it had a light sensor and a humidity sensor and all these things. And they just, what its logic to turn on or off, it was just completely possessed, couldn't be relied upon it. And in the end, I just turned it back to if it sees power to the light in the room, turn on the fan, you're right. So I actually would have been much better off getting a cheaper, dumber extractor fan. And if I wanted to add on the intelligence, I should have just gone to Home Assistant directly, because when you have these black boxes,
you don't know what they do, you don't know their logic, you don't know any of that crap, right? It's
and that's the thing with Home Assistant. It's not just that you can do things, but it's the data that's collected shows you, like, you learn so much about how things work and how things react, and it actually it kind of shows you basically what you should be doing, and you can tune things, and you've so much more feedback there, because if some product or some black box just doesn't expose something or doesn't allow you to configure anything, it's just unusable in some cases, right?
Yeah. So I mean, we talked a little bit about Google Home and like all these voice assistants and stuff. Is that primarily how you augment or drive your automations? What do you like? Sounds like most of it is kind of automated, right? Like
Correct.
natively using automations.
I don't really. I suppose the intention for a lot of this is I don't want to have to interact with anything. It should just work in the background. So all my key things are triggered off bits of data coming in, and they just take care of themselves, and that's the way I really want it, as much as possible. Where I would like voice to be better, but this is, I think, where Home Assistant will solve the problem, not Google, is things like asking information of some strange sensors, or triggering more specific automations that I can say exactly what they want to do. I definitely will use that when I have the ability to do it. Other than that, Home Assistant, it's mostly into the dashboards, right? And it's some of the dashboards I use them while I'm figuring out how these things react, and then I might actually use them less and less, because it's how I figure out. So I have, like, for the heating, I have all these graphs, but once the heating works and you're comfortable, you don't need to look at that. So that's kind of where I've gone. And certain ones you do pull out, like the water temperature, the tank temperature. That's a super useful one to just quickly pull up. Is there hot water right now? And it has the buttons there to turn on. Having those two things beside each other is super powerful. Or you have the scheduler card. So I have my hot water dashboard. I have one for temperature, humidity, heating, weather. Actually, there's some really nice weather cards that just 2 seconds work to pull in around sunset and sunrise, all these things. Alarms, power, battery, and there's good integrations for Home Assistant to warn you around if any of your batteries and any of your smart sensors are going low, that you get a notification, which is really good. It's warned me about one. It's nagging me about another one. I'm just too lazy to change it, and I am worried about the day. I think some of them could be in the official one. So long since I've plugged some of these in, I've almost forgotten.
So I've seen, like, I've actually been tempted to make my own, like, battery alert system for it, because I'll forget, and I'll go, oh, why is it light turning on? Oh, I've got to charge that motion sensor.
I'll try and dig it up. I might have to send it to you afterwards, but that definitely exists. The one thing I'm dreading is the day when the temperature sensor in the kitchen warns me its battery is low, because I have no idea where it is. I've completely forgotten. I've put it somewhere and the skylights in that room. So dodging the sun for your temperature sensor is kind of like, it took a while to find out a spot that didn't at one point of the day tell me that my
Yeah.
kitchen was 35 degrees Celsius. But I've just no idea where it is now.
Yeah. I just do a quick like a iOS notification, right, saying, hey, this motion sensor battery is at 10% or something like that. But yeah, it's fairly, it's not bad. It's not hard.
Yeah. So I think those are my main. Obviously, I've got Power Calc is a good one, which is
I love that
yeah
integration.
It's just, and that's a great, like, so that what that one does is it basically programmatically figures out everyone's Philips Hue model, whatever bulb is the same, and if it's at this percentage brightness, it's going to be using this much electricity. And I'm a big fan of that, again, to use software that, we don't need to go out and buy bulbs that sense power, because it's deterministic, right? Like, you can just, you don't need hardware to tell that. It's a known thing.
Integration by itself is expanding its library. Like, now it knows Sonos speakers, other brands. Like, it's fantastic.
Anytime you go in basically and update it, it'll find more devices, and I suppose a lot of them are using pretty small amounts of electricity, but the fact that it's free, it's automatic, and you can just get a better idea. I'm sure there are cases where it is pulling in things which are using more electricity than they need to be, or in states that are actually, properly wasteful. And yeah, I it's the other one I find amazing is the Bluetooth integration, and what are they called? The repeaters. What's the
proxies?
Yeah, I think like the proxies. Yeah.
Yeah, proxies.
Yeah.
There you go. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's because that was something I was effectively determined to never put Bluetooth into my home assistant. I kind of said, like, it's Bluetooth, the range is too short. It's just not set up for that. But then when I just plugged in the and I still only technically have a USB adapter, but the knowledge that if I ever do need more, and it's just a few seconds of work, it's so good to figure that out.
Well, it's great too, because, like, for, again, as an example, for me, I don't my what am I trying to say? Sorry. Yeah, my Home Assistant instance is running in a Docker container in a VM on my server, right? Which has pretty much 2 USB ports, right? It's like a proper server. And it's like, so to do things like that, I've already got a Zigbee stick and a Z-Wave stick, right? So now I don't really, I can use USB hubs and stuff like that, but I don't need to.
And
to
also where your compute power is not necessarily the most ideal location for your signal to come from, right?
100%, right? Mine's in my basement in, like, a part of the house that is just, we never go into, right? And it's kind of far away from everything else, right? So my shades up here, it won't reach, right? Like, those kind of things. Right? So there's,
and I suppose that's another kind of thing that I'm looking forward to and hopeful that Home Assistant and is it Thread and Matter, the support for those coming out, I'll definitely be keeping an eye on, because currently I have ended up in a slightly kind of awkward situation where all my bulbs are still connected to the Philips Hue hub, but then all the smart switches to control that are all on a different Zigbee mesh, right, with just a USB coordinator I have. So I'm hopeful that, I know Philips have said they are going to support it. I'm hopeful then that kind of Home Assistant and open source projects will be able to kind of bridge the way, similarly to Zigbee to MQTT, that we can have some sort of bridge projects that my buttons on, and even if officially none of these are ever going to support Thread, that if we have a bridge from MQTT to that, we could actually, again, without replacing all the hardware, actually get the benefits of that new technology for free, effectively. So I'll definitely be keeping an eye on that, because at the minute, some of my smart buttons, and I'm very thankful for Blueprints in Home Assistant, have been great for that. because I had things like some buttons you press and hold is an action, and then it's the duration, the little IKEA ones. It's the duration is how long that controls the dimness, going up or down of the light. But trying to kind of DIY that yourself is really awkward, because it's about delays and timing then, and trying to
and effort.
It's a kind of a level up. So the blueprints have been fantastic for that, and there's one I've got, and it works so well. It's got so many different models. Again, just the community is out there. It's got so many different models. You just click the drop down, which button do you have from which manufacturer, which type of light, and then there's all the different options for if it has a long hold or double tap.
Sure.
It even has simulated double taps, which is the one thing is not super reliable, but you kind of can't blame the guys for that not being too reliable, because they have made it up effectively that the button isn't officially supporting a double tap, but this blueprint is waiting and watching but it is a bit too tight to get the timing just right on that one, unfortunately. But I think if we can get that bridge across to with thread and matter and sync those things up, hopefully that your legacy Zigbee stuff, we don't actually just end up kind of wanting to throw it away.
Sure.
I'm sure people will come up with some way that we can kind of add that proxy process middle layer that will allow you integrate it and reuse those.
Yeah, I've got a whole bunch of Xiaomi stuff on Zigbee, right, that is still sitting in the cupboard. Just, buttons that I thought, I'll use this somewhere, right, or something like that. So I don't want all those to go to waste.
Yeah, for sure. It's something I've been trying to get in the habit of doing, is buy what you actually need, because it is very tempting to end up with 3, 4, 5, 6 things, and you're like, okay, the shipping is this amount, I might as well just get a few more. But it's tempting, but I'm trying to cut down on that, so that things are actually used, because things do go out of date as well with technology. Home Assistant is a great hedge against that, because it gives us so much more power, so that someone shutting down a cloud server, or someone deciding that they're not going to support an API or not going to update their Android app to the latest version, and I get warnings on various different apps that they're no longer going to work. So having all these things out there through Home Assistant and through the integrations is so good for just not so wasteful,
Nothing worse than e-bricks, right? Like when they just create e-waste, and you got a heavy paperweight from an old product that's no longer supported.
Yeah. The last thing I might mention, all right, is I did have a recent incident with Home Assistant. I had a power cut, which corrupted. So I have a Proxmox server where Home Assistant is a virtual machine. So I had several days of downtime there, because I just didn't get around to going back in and trying to debug. But I will say, for Home Assistant's point of view, the Google Drive backup and restore just worked absolutely perfectly. I was kind of worried for some reason that it wouldn't bring back the historical statistics, but it brought back absolutely everything. So really impressed by that. And I think where I want to go from here is to try and treat Home Assistant more like an appliance, and really try and not have it, even though I am, I have done it in the complicated person who knows things about IT way. But really, I think where it's really cool to see, and even things like the yellow and the dedicated hardware, just the different more embedded type devices that Home Assistant supports, is that you can get Home Assistant to this like little box that is going to be resilient to power cuts, and if the problem happens, you press 2 buttons and it restores itself. Or if you have a hardware failure, well, you just throw it away, and in 15 minutes you're back up and running. Because I don't want to really get into having uninterruptible power supplies, or having full computers running these things is not. I don't know. For me, I kind of like it, but then when it's as integral to your house as it does become, sometimes it's better to. It's like I did with the alarm, buying the dedicated hardware. It's better to actually just say that this is my little Home Assistant box. So that's something I'll try and do, basically, to split that out from the larger machine.
So
Yeah, that's a good point.
would you rather kind of one simple powerful box or a bunch of little ones that kind of spread out across whatever?
I think for Home Assistant, with the fact that it is designed to run on a small thing, and its importance now, I mean, my lights, don't work. If Home Assistant is down, I really want that to be a dedicated appliance. Yeah, I really want that to be a dedicated appliance. And
Yeah.
a big computer server, I'm going to keep that only for things like storage and media and things that actually need horsepower and grunt and space. But otherwise, Home Assistant is like the perfect example of something which, for me at least, it makes perfect sense to treat it more like, and the as a project, I've not been around. I don't know kind of its origins in terms of original dates, but even in the period 2020 to now that I've been using it, so it's so much more polished and so much more is just click and drag and drop and all these things. So it means that, and that's what I want for this, is your anything to do with your smart home. You can't have it that when it breaks, you're in at the command line. You really don't want that.
Yeah.
It's not fair to your family as well if you're away. You're like, other things, if I have file sync or whatever and that goes down, or photos or music around the house, like, who cares, right? If that computer goes down. But the Home Assistant one, and hopefully as well, possibly, if I could get it onto something that was 12 volt, is something I've been thinking about too. If like you could have a battery backup. Obviously, having mains power battery backup devices, they're quite bulky and expensive and noisy and all these things. But if you have your Wi-Fi router, your modem coming in from your fiber, your Home Assistant, if all of those are on 12 volt, should be possible to have a kind of effectively a beefy battery pack, nothing too crazy, that would give you a few hours of runtime at least. Keep your internet up and running, keep your smart home up and running. All the sensors are on battery and Zigbee anyway for a lot of things. That would be super, super powerful. So we'll see. I don't think that perfect product exists out there yet. But I think in time, possibly it will. Again, making DIY lithium-ion batteries is not something I'm going to go down the route of trying to cobble together. But I think it's so good how appliance, I think, is and would I install Home Assistant for some family member? And it definitely is at that stage where someone you could actually trust it, and you could be pretty confident to give it to someone, and that it'll just work. Nothing bad will happen, and if something crazy happens, you'll be able to probably remotely just tell them, look, I've even got a spare Raspberry Pi with a spare SD card in the cupboard beside, and 3 or 4 clicks and it restores your backup and you continue on,
The last thing you want to do is have to instruct someone, okay, you turn this computer on, then you have to run this command. You should be able to just power cycle the thing and Home Assistant comes back up.
And it just works.
Yeah.
And like Home Assistant itself, I think if I had been able to recover the virtual machine, Home Assistant probably would have come back. And it gracefully can handle power cuts. My issue, unfortunately, was that I just there was a corruption on the actual disk, which is something that Home Assistant can't control about, and it was outside of Home Assistant. I'm not sure how obviously there's levels where Home Assistant it's going to be impossible for it to recover, but because Home Assistant has that such easy backup, and I think there's one for OneDrive as well for people who have that from Microsoft. That feature is there that takes snapshots every time you do an update, and daily snapshots and things like and that's the things with backups for any IT or computer software thing, is that in theory they're easy to set up, but will you actually spend the half day doing it, or a few hours, or even a half an hour, whereas the Home Assistant thing is like 30 seconds. So definitely my biggest recommendation to everyone is, and because it uses your Google Drive and it's a couple of 100 megabytes, so even if you're only got the free storage, basically no one has an excuse to not have that backup set up, and it will serve them well.
Yeah.
But you've just prompted me to go and make sure I've got that set up. So I'll check that again.
That's funny.
It's been so long since I think it's just one of those things we just set and forget it, right? I'm pretty sure I've configured it. But yeah, now I don't trust myself.
There you go. And that's important too. Test your backups. Right?
Yes.
You don't know that it works for sure until you see it work. So
yeah, there is there's a website I also have which sends me emails if things fail.
Healthchecks.io is one of them.
That's the one, yeah. That's great, and that's something I actually want to set up for Home Assistant myself, and I know there is an integration, so that if Home Assistant is even down for an hour, right, I'd want to know that.
Yeah.
So I'm going to try and set that up soon as well, which is something I should do, because the longer it's down, it's not capturing metrics and things like the energy and whatnot are not getting captured. And what'll happen is if it's down for a few days, the counter on the whole home energy monitor is still ticking up. So then it says that you used an obscene amount in one day. So I do like to try and keep it up, because other little things I've done around the house completely separate from Home Assistant, being able to see my electricity and heating usage has actually been really good in terms of has that been effective? Has that been a good use of your time to change window seals and change hinges and windows and various bits and pieces like that? So actually that data is extremely valuable, even for things I can't think of now. If the house ever has any improvements or anything done to it, you'll be able to go back and see what was the success of something. And if you do an experiment, is it worth, because sometimes people can spend thousands on home upgrades or things, but you actually, most of the time people are going in blind or just believing what some advisor will tell them. But with the Home Assistant statistics, you might have a chance at least of having a much more solid understanding of what will happen.
Yeah,
100%.
I don't think I have any other major items. I mean, there's a huge surface area of Home Assistant that I haven't even really touched yet. Scenes. I haven't really got into those, but it's a slow feature creep and a slow improvement that Home Assistant has. Buttons or something I hadn't really used for a long time, but now I started using those a lot. Just the fact that you don't have that second press to do something, right? Oftentimes you're just going into the light switch, the light, to toggle it. You're not doing any of the fancy color changes. For me, every light is always just on warm white. That's it. I'm never changing those things. So it's just a slow improvement, and I think that's the way it will continue to be.
Well, Rian, thank you so much for taking the time talking to us about your epic little setup. We'll leave links to all those little things that you've mentioned today in our show notes, and really appreciate it.
Okay.
Thank you.
Cheers. Thanks very much, guys.
Cheers.
Thanks.
Cheers.